So here's a track that I made yesterday called Tech Hit Offbeat, because for one, the sound I use is called tech chord or technochord hit, so that's the tech hit bit, and offbeat is because what I did is, if you check here, all the notes are drawn in a little bit off. I don't know if you can see that, but here's where they're supposed to be, and they're a little bit off, and it gives you a sound where it's like that. And if you listen to that with the snare, you'll see that it sounds off. So you can kind of hear that. Basically, I'm going to explain to you how I made this track. The sound that I used is part of Logic. It's no third-party sound or sound pack or anything like that. But what is the drums I used, because the ones in Logic good for most of the music that I make. So I used the kicks and the hi-hats, snares, all that stuff from third-party kits, and that I loaded into the sampler, which kind of looks like this, and you have sample 1, sample 2, sample 3, sample 4, so on, and you load each one in separately as a sample. So if I pull up the keyboard and I just go down here, then it's like, that's a kick, that's a snare, and that's a little tom sort of roll thing. You know, you see how it works. You have old and new sounds from different various kits, and then the sub bass as well. That's from Logic itself. So that's called a deep sub bass. Sub bass is the most common bass that most people use. It's like the sort of underlying bass of most tracks that you'll hear, where you'll hear everything, but then you'll sort of hear and feel this sort of bassy sort of sound. It doesn't have so much of a tone, but that's what I used. And also I used glide on it, which kind of tells you, or does for you, when you draw on the notes on here, the more glide there is, the longer each note takes to get to the next one. And so if I play it for you, you'll hear that there will be like a note that goes in and then comes out slowly. So in the last little bit is where I added most of the glide, where it goes like a sort of warpy sound, like a woo. That's it, kind of coming in and then coming back down to the lower note, just in a slower attack time, which sounds pretty cool, which I use for a lot of my tracks. And then I also have these right here, which are loops of hi-hats, but sort of a mixture of both, which are closed and open. So you'll hear this, and you'll hear like taps, and then you'll hear a little bit of open hi-hats. And those are something I use a lot of the time, so if I put the snare in, it sounds really cool. So that's what that sounds like. And then I also added a little bell to have it kind of have a little bit more of a feel to one of the snares, not on every single snare. Kind of like that. And then the kicks as well. You know, when you do this for a while, you sort of just know where to put them and how it sounds, what sounds best and what doesn't. So if I play it with the kicks, you'll see that it plays kind of with together and it sounds pretty good. Like that. And then I added the bass on top of that. What I mostly do to do that is I'll drag this loop of kicks and I will drag it down to the bass instrument, and I will sort of place them up and down in notes so that you get a different sort of variation of notes, but they're all in place with the kick so it doesn't sound off or they're in weird places. So you kind of get that. And then I also added, this isn't so much of a big contribution to the whole song, but it's just a sort of little snare, I mean not snare, sorry, a sort of crashy, sort of open hi-hat thing, which is another loop, which is the one on top of the one I just explained, and you'll hear it now. And so you'll hear them kind of going in and out of low and high frequencies. The ones where you sort of hear them being closed off and muffled is where they're cutting out the highs, which sounds pretty cool. And then on top of all of that is the first thing I explained, which is where all these notes are off beat. So if I show you again with the other things that I've just explained, you'll see that they sound very different if you just move all the notes a tiny little bit. So if I move them back to normal, back to like where they're supposed to be in a usual track, where they're on beat and on time, here's what it'll sound like. So that sounds pretty normal, but when you play it with other drums and stuff, it will sound a very different sort of vibe. Here you'll see. So you might not notice too much of a difference, but if I go back to this, how it was, so offbeat can be put to use a lot of the time to make a track sound very good, and I've also done it to the hi-hats. So if I put the hi-hats back to normal like I did with the other instrument just then, you'll hear the difference. So it sounds pretty normal, but if I move it back to how they were, you'll hear the difference because they'll be in sync with the other instrument, which is offbeat as well. So that's how that sounds, pretty cool, offbeat, but still has a good sound to it. And then if I play the whole thing together with the hi-hat loop that I told you about and the other thing I told you about, which was another loop of sort of crashes and various other things, these two, you'll hear the difference. When it has that sort of open and close hi-hat, it gives it a lot of sound and difference. And that's kind of a breakdown of how I've started this track off. As you can see, it's only a few bars long, but I will be working to extend it, you know, into a full track where I can have breaks and stuff where you cut out the instruments I'm talking about and just kind of build it up and build it down and whatever. But that's a brief or sort of detailed explanation into how I make just one of the many tracks I make. You know, not all of them are offbeat, but it's just a different style that works very well and is very usable in many sort of tracks. You'll hear it in house music, hip hop, things like this, to be exact, which is a sort of hip hop, modern hip hop beat. And yeah, this is a breakdown of how I would usually make a track. So you can put all this together yourself if you ever wanted to learn, by using, if you go online, there's just tons and tons of different websites where you can download all these third-party instruments and sound packs. And if you open up Ultrabeat, which is the main drum plugin for Logic, you can just load in your own samples from those sound packs, and you can create your own drum kits, which I'll show you quickly. So if you see here, it says Ultrabeat, and I go here, I have an Equali kit, which is a favourite producer of mine, and then I have Kurz, Medicine, and Benjamin, and Oshi, which are like 4 of my favourite producers. That's a kit that has their sounds in there, and you can do that as well. I think if you go to here, here, I don't know if you can see this, but it says drag and drop samples, which is a completely clean slate of open samples that you can just drag and drop your own samples in, and then you can save it as your own kit. And I do that all the time. And yeah, it's a very usable thing to use for all sorts of things. You know, you don't have to use it for drums, you can use it for sounds. You can even use one sound and have it pitch up and down throughout the whole thing. Yeah, and that's a brief breakdown. I hope you enjoyed it, and you can learn from it and put it to work yourself using the same things I sort of explained here. It's yeah, it's a wrap.